Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another AutoTrader Podcast show. And my name is George Mienie, and as usual, joined by none other than Wandile Sishi. And just a reminder that this podcast goes out weekly at 9 a.m. on a Monday. And smash the like button, but more importantly, subscribe so that you can get future episodes notified.
Yeah.
How's it going, Wendy?
Not too bad. It's another week that we get to talk about this time the future of mobility. So I'm super excited to see what we can unpack and kind of inform. I think that's the big thing.
Great. So, well, let's get right into it. Today, we're talking about or trying to answer a question. Are EVs finally making their way to South Africa? And we recently attended the Smarter Mobility Conference, which is Africa's premier electric vehicle conference, which features motoring industry experts, governments, and entrepreneurs in the EV space. In Africa and South Africa, and some really incredible things have come out of this year's conference. And today we're lucky enough to be joined by David Ashdown, who is the CEO of the Vuka Group, the organizers of the Smarter Mobility Africa conference. And he's here to discuss some of the exciting developments and give us some insights into this year's show. Welcome, David.
Good morning, George. Good morning, Wendy. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be a part of this broadcast this morning.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you here. And I mean, truth be told, technology and circumstances just kind of not let us have David in the studio or with us on Zoom for the last 2 weeks for some reason. Something good must be coming out of this podcast today, because something's been working against it.
I hope we're able to replicate what we did on the stage in Johannesburg about 3 weeks ago now, George, because I thought the session was really good. So I hope I've not forgotten too much about the EV report.
No, I'm sure you haven't. So welcome to the show, David. And, just give the listeners a little bit of a flavor for your background and Smarter Mobility, how you guys got into it. And, what is First Prize? What are you trying to get the audience that Smarter Mobility serves to remember, more importantly?
So, it's a really good question, George. And what we do as an organization is we create platforms and we connect individuals and organizations to information and each other through events, media titles, information, news portals, etc. And we're working in the smart mobility space, or the future of mobility. We've joined a collaboration with a young organizer guy called Ben Pullen, who launched the Smarter Mobility event about 3 years ago.
Yeah,
he's onboarded that portfolio into the Vuka Group now, and we're working collaboratively to support the development of that industry sector. Now, there's a lot of good things happening, and I think it's important early on to just identify that the future of mobility is not exclusively electric vehicles. It's also in fleet management, it's in cycling, walking, and it's something that Ben talks a lot to me about as well. But I know we're here to talk about the future of EVs today. So we look to create an annual meeting place for the industry sector. We look to introduce new technologies, new trends, to create a point of discussion and debate around future, and also, importantly, to connect the industry. That's essentially what we do as a business. We want to connect. We want to connect people to information and organizations to each other to develop an industry sector. And I think when I look at the smart mobility space, it's a really exciting space for us to be operating in, because it's an industry sector that's in its ascendancy. And with that comes a lot of innovation, a lot of excitement, and a lot of new products and new trends coming to market. And with it, a lot of challenges that need to be overcome as well. So it works well for a company like ours.
Well, that's brilliant. I mean, I don't think there's anything more topical around the world today besides lockdown or COVID-19 than EVs and the future of, I suppose, greener, cleaner energy, and and everything that stems from that. And it's interesting that you mentioned walking and cycling and those kinds of ways to get around, because at the end of the day, walking or cycling is smarter mobility, right?
Yep, absolutely. It's being able to use other forms of transport than a combustion engine that is not necessarily good for the environment.
Exactly.
Just to kind of to your point of how the show has grown over the last few years. I mean, going back to last year, something that wasn't really spoken about, which was really spotlighted this year, was buses and basically, to your point, other forms of mobility which are really important that we need to sort of unpack in greater detail. So I'm glad to see that innovation, that sort of those conversations are now becoming a lot more popular and a lot more, I guess, South African based, not just international.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So before we get into the meat of the show, David, we thought we would for the listeners that are listening or have downloaded this podcast or even watching on YouTube, to get to know David a little bit better, we've prepared a couple of exam questions, which we'll go through with David and see if he passes. So David, very quickly, you've got to answer as quickly as you possibly can. I've got 7 questions for you. The first question is: winter or summer?
Definitely summer.
Burger or steak?
Veggie burger.
Book or movie?
Book.
And in terms of vacation, bush or beach?
Combination of both, if possible, but if necessary, beach.
Beach in the bush. Well, in terms of car, ICE, battery, electric, or hybrid?
Have combustion. Would like electric.
Okay. What is your first car?
It was a Fiesta 1.3 Mark 1. Showing my age there.
A Ford
Fiesta, and that was in the UK. I'm assuming you probably had them here as well.
Yeah, we do. What is your current car?
I have a Kia Sportage as the family car, and I have an original Land Rover Defender as the getaway vehicle. Oh. And I also ride a Husqvarna Svartpilen motorbike as well.
Oh, wow. The one answer I've never heard to those last 2 questions is current car and first car being, the same car where somebody still got their first car. So it just shows you how people move on with vehicles. So thanks for that, David. I hope you know a little bit more about David now. Did pick up a little bit of vegetarian there, David. Is that right?
Yep. Trying to do my bit, moving away from meat.
Future food as well.
Future food, exactly. So a little bit of history, on EVs in South Africa, just to set the stage before we kind of dive in even further. And mass produced, and when I say mass produced, I mean factory produced on a production line. Electric vehicles have been in South Africa for the last 10 years. It's a very little known fact that they've been around in the last for the last 10 years. And in that time, a few things have happened. There are 4 available mass-produced models: the Porsche Taycan, the Jaguar I-Pace, the Mini SE, and the BMW i3. And let's not forget the Nissan Leaf. Nissan Leaf started out, and I'd like to, while people, I think, say bad things about the Nissan Leaf, you got to take your hat off to the first early starters, the guys that come into the market first and really are the bedrock of the learning of the rest of us. And Nissan, I think, was one of those. They came into the market early. Battery didn't last too long, degraded. Charging infrastructure wasn't here. And they taught us a lot, I think. So let's not look down on Nissan, because the Nissan Leaf is no longer in South Africa. And then there are other EVs that are available for sale in the country, as well as the XC40 P8 Recharge. And I mean, I'm not sure you can call that an EV, but it's rumored, which I think is probably a fact, that there are many EVs coming in the first and second quarter of next year, and there are a lot of hybrids coming to the country. As a matter of fact, I think BMW said that they want over 30 hybrids and EVs in South Africa next year. So David, with these mass-produced EVs in the country since about 2010, and being at this year's conference, being on the stage, and interacting with all the keynote speakers, what are your key takeaways from this year's conference and from your experience as being involved with smarter mobility for the first year?
So from my perspective, I think first and foremost, it's important I qualify. I'm a consumer in the respect it comes to from an EV future. I have an understanding of EVs, but my perspective is really about what it means, an EV from a consumer's world. And what I learned at the Smarter Mobility Conference was that there's an anxiety on range from a consumer perspective. It's something that I consider as to whether will the vehicle get me from A to B if B is further than 250 kilometers, for example. And then there's a price consideration. Am I going to be paying more for an EV than I would be for an ICE engine car? And then what's the availability of charging stations around the country? I can certainly commute my urban commute in Cape Town, and I can see a number of locations where I could potentially charge my vehicle. You're starting to see them in some of the shopping areas now. So I guess that was the interesting bit for me, was to work through the presentation document and the report, George, that was conducted by AutoTrader in partnership with Smarter Mobility Africa, and to shed some insight onto those.
Yeah,
so that's those areas that I didn't have an awareness of.
Yeah, I think David speaks to something that's very important, which you basically hit the nail right on. Well, you hit the hammer right on the nail, in the sense that there's a huge education piece that, is something that the industry as a whole needs to kind of work on. It's something that we're very passionate about. And, it's some of the things that we want to get across to consumers, because I think a lot of people just don't understand what is available to them, how much it costs, and what it means to actually live with an EV. The sort of things that you spoke about there, the range anxiety and the infrastructure, are key things that, we spoke about this year at the summit. And I think it's going to be a learning point for a lot of people, but those are the things that are going to really elevate and help the introduction of EVs in the market.
Well, I mean, you speak about one thing there, Wendy, which David touched on as well, and that is charging. And we know that locally there is one charger, one in 20 internationally, whereas 1 in 4 in South Africa, where we are. 4 times ahead versus the international countries, where we've got much more charging stations per EV on the road. But is that an indication, do you think, David, of just low consumer penetration into EVs? There's just too few of them on the road. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, I drive the Jaguar I-Pace. It's it's my now car of everyday use, and the question I get the most when people look at that car is it a hybrid? And I can't tell you over the last couple of weeks how many people, what is that? Is that a hybrid? And I say, no, it's a full battery electric. But doesn't it have an engine? No. And that's the question I've got the most over the last couple of weeks. And then the second question, once I say it's battery electric, and no, it doesn't have an engine, and in some instances just open the bonnet and show them it doesn't have an engine, is the second question, but where do you charge it? Mm-hmm. And then I have to kind of say, well, there are 300 charging stations. Oh, really? Where? I think people, I don't know what your take on this is, David, but I think people are thinking that they're expecting to see these filling station type venues where there's this big sign with, you can charge your EV, and that's not the case at all.
I think to go back to your original question, it's an adoption issue, isn't it? It's an adoption and awareness issue. The fact that there is 1 in 4 charging stations to an EV in South Africa compared to 1 in 20 internationally, that's simply a law of averages, and the fact that there are significantly less electric vehicles on the road. If South Africa had the number of electric vehicles on the road that the UK does, given land mass, etc., the South Africa ratio would be significantly higher than 1 in 20. So it's an adoption issue or a market issue, I would have thought.
A penetration issue, yeah, exactly. So I mean, I would think we don't have enough chargers, right? The 1 in 20, the 1 in 4 might be actually misleading because there's too few of these cars on the road. I mean, I think there are like 1,500 of them, right?
I would say the maths leads us to that conclusion. Yes. Yeah. If we follow a science-based approach to it, yes. The other piece about the awareness of does it have an engine? I think that's an education piece, isn't it? And that will come as the OEMs begin to roll out electric vehicles in South Africa. I think the reality is that South Africa has not been an electric vehicle development market probably until now. Yeah. Whereas and I don't want to use this term loosely, but in the Western world, actually, there's been an EV drive, excuse the pun, for a long period of time now.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back in time a little bit here, and you can actually see the reason for that. Well, based on my assumption, is because the Toyota Prius was around for so long, and it kind of spurred the idea of not just having an internal combustion engine. I think a lot of people assume, and we actually did a show on hybrids, that kind of unpacked this, assume that a hybrid is a battery electric vehicle. So for a lot of South Africans, because they just, the adoption is not there yet, they just assume that any car that doesn't have, or doesn't only drive on a combustion engine is a hybrid, which is not the case. And we're learning the differences and the nuances and why the separation of the two is so important for people to understand, because ultimately it will impact your daily driving and your mobility in the future.
Well, I mean, it's very weird for me.
Well.
Go on, David.
I was going to say that there's a cultural piece here and an understanding and education piece going back over the last century, and that's the fact that really we all understand how a combustion engine works. We've grown up in that era, in that age. We're now changing technologies, and many people will look at that battery car directly to your example, George, and say, "Well, where's the engine? Well, how does it work? I don't really get it. Does it work like a torch? I plug a battery in and off I go, like I just switch on the light bulb." So there's a whole technology advancement in the fact that we've grown up with engines. The first cars we sat in and our grandparents sat in, they were all combustion engines. So we understand how the propulsion is created. Now you're just asking. Now we've got to learn a different methodology, a different way of movement.
I wonder if this happened back in the late 1800s when we went from horses to internal combustion engine vehicles, where sitting in a seat versus straddling something and the thing not being alive was a conundrum. How does this thing even move forward? I wonder if the same sorts of problems existed where where's the horse? Are you hiding it somewhere?
Yeah.
What about George, when we get to the point when there's no steering wheel in your car?
Yeah, that's a conundrum for me even.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? You go in your car and you push the destination into the Tesla electronic keyboard in front of you, and then suddenly the car just packs away and off you go. And now you have to put your faith in the vehicle that's going to get you from A to B. That's going to be that sort of conundrum. It's that change in approach that I just don't think we are educated towards or ready to accept at this stage.
Are we ever ready to accept the new things that come along? And so in terms of the conference, you guys all know that we have a deadline. You said the Western world, the European Union, and some other countries have this drop dead date, 2030, 2035, 2040, depending on which country you're talking about. And so I want to talk about the effects of that and South Africa. South Africa moving fast enough? Are we going to get to 2030? I mean, we're in 2021 going into 2022 already. Are we going to get to 2030 having adopted it as South African consumers? And what happens if we don't? What's your sense, Wandile?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few conversations with some of the OEMs, and we know that, like you're saying, essentially, South Africa is more so than anything an export nation. So we depend on other countries buying the vehicles from South Africa. And with these deadlines being in place in Europe, where they're saying if it's not an EV by the year 2035, or worst case scenario 2030, that's going to have some serious implications. And we're seeing already a lot of stakeholders in the industry sort of scrambling and finding, quick ways and better ways to make sure that, one, we're manufacturing these vehicles in South Africa, because that's where the pain is really going to come. And there's a lot of things that happen after that. That's when we're going to see a lot of penetration, because the vehicles ultimately are going to get cheaper. So there's kind of a knock-on effect as a result of these drop dead dates. And if you don't sort of get the manufacturing right soon, it could be a problem. But it's good to see that the industry is coming together and we have these forums where we can, find solutions to these issues.
I mean, David, you've been in South Africa now for a little while. What is your sense on the ground? I get those questions around, is this a hybrid? And it just makes me generally feel like, first of all, South African education is not at the level where it should be when it comes to these new energy vehicles or the EV future. But from an industry point of view, I feel like we're not moving fast enough. It takes a long time to change manufacturing facilities. It takes a long time to change regulation and import taxes and all those things. From your short time in South Africa, what have you seen and can juxtapose against places like the UK?
I've been living in Cape Town now for 10 years, and I haven't seen a significant adoption of an electric vehicle future in Cape Town. I know Cape Town as a metropole and the government in Western Cape have a vision to be for smarter mobility, for electric vehicle future. Some of the buses have already migrated, the My City bus and the Golden Arrows. You see them on the roads. A number of their fleet are electric vehicles, but compared to the UK, I think we're miles apart in that respect. And I think I struggle to see South Africa having adopted EVs by 2030. Frankly, I struggle to see Europe having adopted EVs only by 2030 as well. The 8 years to get to that dateline and the amount of infrastructure developments required for the charging and the increased energy demand to charge the vehicle, that I just don't see how the European Union or the UK is going to move that industry space so quickly, so far. And I guess talking from a South Africa perspective, there are fundamentals required to be able to adopt an EV future in South Africa. At the moment, we're going through rolling blackouts in South Africa again, aren't we?
Exactly.
You can't really run an EV. You can't have an EV mobility when you can't have regular or sustainable power to charge those vehicles from. Well, I know, George, you have an off-grid solution for that, but that's not going to be available to everybody.
No, so it's very expensive. So it's not something that is accessible. So what is the effect of that? And I'd like to believe that we're going to move faster, and we're going to begin moving faster. And conferences like Smarter Mobility, and Vuka and AutoTrader are doing great things to try and move the needle. But at the end of the day, we've all got to move together. And are we moving fast enough? Because what's the effect? If we don't hit these deadlines, and let's call it 2030, let's call it 2040 for Europe.
2040,
yeah. Just give them an extra 10 years. Let's find 10 years somewhere. It's fine. Give them an extra 10 years. And so that gives us a slightly bigger window of opportunity. But if we don't start to really move in that direction, South Africa's fleet of vehicles, we've got about 11 to 12 million vehicles in our car park. South Africa's fleet of vehicles are going to begin aging. Second-hand car prices are going to start going up. We're going to lose 60% of our manufacture, which is exported, because our local economy can't sustain our production. We're just too small an economy. And all of those things have a massively negative impact on the South African economic environment. And I suppose that's why David, myself, you, Wandile, and AutoTrader are so passionate about this particular topic, is because it has far-reaching effects, if not kind of grabbed and really things changed very, very quickly. And I know you've been in South Africa for a decade, David. But I mean, I'm pretty sure you keep up by and large with what's happening in the UK. Did European countries, particularly the UK, grapple with these problems as well? Are they still grappling with these problems? I think
to a certain extent, yes, they are. I think any nation would grapple with the problems of adoption, infrastructure. I remember we talked on the stage about what comes first, the chicken and egg scenario. Is it the charging stations or the vehicles?
Yeah.
it seems to be, from an OEM perspective, it's going to be the vehicle coming for the charging station, perhaps in South Africa, or the infrastructure required. But it's definitely an economic opportunity for South Africa. There is good, as I understand, there is strong automotive production and assembly plants here. I believe the president was announced recently that there will be new assembly lines created, and that there is an economic push to work with the automotive sector to manufacture and assemble in South Africa, which is positive. I think you can then start to explore the idea of what the EVs look like outside of South Africa's borders as well, going up into the continent. That's an even bigger question. There'll be countries like Rwanda, which in some degrees is a well-developed nation with heavy and strong infrastructure projects that are running that may get to that EV adoption place faster than South Africa. I don't know. I can't really pinpoint what the future is. Would I buy an EV in South Africa? Yes, when I have confidence that the kind of ride that I'm looking for, I can competently and safely achieve in an EV, which I believe I could, because I'm a local Cape Townian commuter. I don't do long distances. If I want to do long distances, then I've got a problem.
Well,
I'll take the diesel chugging Land Rover.
Diesel chugging Land Rover. I mean, some of my friends have got some things to say about Land Rover. I owned a Land Rover before my Jaguar, so I've never had a day's problems with the Land Rover. But we're not here to talk about Land Rovers, Wandile. So I mean, three things came out in the study with smarter mobility, and those three things were home charging, public charging, and initial cost of purchase. Wandile, do you think these are big problems? Do you think we're making any headway with these issues?
Okay, so I can only, based off last year versus this year, there has been a little bit of, positive feedback with regards to how people are educating themselves with regards to EVs. But still, with regards to home and public charging, consumers still want 62% better home charging and 42% better public fast charging. Now, that's not to say realistic currently. There are nations in the world where these numbers are being hit, but it's very, very small, extremely small. So I think there's more of an education piece with regards to what charging is and how to charge an EV. A lot of people have this perception that it's like going to a filling station where you only fill it up when it's empty. But, you always tell us that that's not the case. You sort of charge on the go whenever you have a chance, whenever you get home, almost like your cell phone. Yeah. And then with regards to initial cost, people still want an EV that's cheaper than 500,000 Rand. This is difficult because, once again, the cheapest EV, as we know, is more than that, almost 140,000 Rand more than that, actually. So that's going to be a huge problem with regards to adoption, because we just can't. Those numbers are still very unattainable for a lot of South Africans. And then to your last point with better range, consumers still want 54% better range on EVs. Which is also another challenge. Do you need that range for you to have a normal mobility life with an EV? No. Once again, another education piece.
Well, I mean, I think it was David that brought up on the stage, David, when we were there. My memory fails me, but I think you brought up the fact that the batteries on EVs might get smaller, given the lack of the need to travel long distances, just in your example. So, a lot of people don't use cars for long distance trips. They use airplanes for long distance trips, and most of their commute is local, work and back, shops and back, etc. Do you need Jaguar I-Pace with 90 kilowatt hours? Because the battery is the biggest cost of the car, right?
Yeah.
So do we need these big cars? And
I think when we were talking about it, I think we referred to exponential growth in technology, and we are very much at an immature phase of the EV future, and battery technology will continue to improve. Range will continue to improve. Charging times will continue to come down. And you can see that if you look at the exponential curve on technology advancement just in a Tesla over the last 5 years, I guess.
Well, talking about
that's true.
early in the technology advancement. Look at the combustion engine 100 years ago compared to it today. You weren't driving around in a V8 supercar for the first time you sat in a seat, were you?
Yeah, exactly. And back then all cars broke down. Today Land Rovers break down.
Occasionally.
No, I'm only kidding. Only the older Land Rovers break down. My Land Rover never broke down. So technology advancement is exponentially growing, and I see that future. But talking about the cost, I don't know if you guys saw, but the Tesla Model 3 significantly increased in price over the last couple of weeks. It was supposed to be a $35,000 car. I think it's gone up to $42,000 for the Model 3 now.
What's the reason for that? Is it a brand new vehicle or the exact same existing vehicles?
Don't know, but
is it directly proportional to Elon Musk's net worth as well? Because I saw that increase significantly over the last 3 weeks at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think all car prices in general have been increasing, not at that rate. I think that's a bit scary, and I think that's got more to do with Tesla, the brand. But yeah, back to the concept of price. It's still a serious challenge in South Africa. There's still some work that needs to be done with regards to how can we make them cheaper and more accessible. In the report, we saw that 98% of respondents hadn't even been in an EV before. That's something that needs to be addressed. We need to get more people experiencing the vehicles, or else adoption is never going to happen.
Exactly. Well, I mean, let's we've got a couple of minutes left of the show. Let's talk about load shedding. We spoke about it a little bit earlier on. Is load shedding a real problem? I mean, there was a CSIR study in Tshwane that showed that overnight charging an EV would have absolutely zero effect on the grid. And it was an interesting study. But is there a real concern with load shedding, or is it really just energy demand? I don't think load shedding plays a part. Living with my EV, yes, I've got renewable energy on my house, so I charge my car during the day. I can't charge my car during the night because my lithium-ion batteries in my garage, I just don't have enough of them, and they're bloody expensive. To be able to charge the car, it will deplete my car. My car has 3 times the battery capacity versus the batteries in the garage. So you can imagine the car would eat through those batteries very quickly, and I would switch over to Eskom anyway. So I can only charge my car during the day in sunlight. Can't do it at night. So if I really am driving a lot, I have to use Eskom to charge my car. Now, before I had the renewable energy system in the house, I would be using Eskom to charge the car. And I charge for maybe 2 to 3 hours a day. Costs me R2.30 a kilowatt, and by the next morning the car is charged. So if you think about load shedding for 2 hours at a time, if you leave your car plugged in, if there's a call it a 10-hour window between when you park versus when you want to take the car out again, at any point during those 10 hours, your car is going to charge up. So I don't think load shedding is an issue. But the other question is the demand, or I think David mentioned it a little bit earlier on, is the draw on the power grid the issue?
So I think not. Just to answer that question, based off the CSIR study. So what they kind of unpacked is most people would actually be charging in the evenings when demand for electricity is not as high. What do
you mean demand for electricity is not high? Because I would imagine between the sunset and say 10 o'clock at night, demand is at its highest.
Yeah, but not overnight when you're sleeping.
You're talking about like 12 to 6.
Yeah,
okay.
Correct.
Okay.
When most people would be charging their vehicles, or at least go into those hours charging their vehicles. And based on that, they don't think that it's going to be too much of a strain on the system. And on top of that, load shedding on average is 2 hours, maybe 4 hours on a really bad, stage. So they, Eskom, well, the CSIR study says that potentially it wouldn't be too much of a demand, but we'll see when there's 10,000, 50,000 different EVs in the country, how they'll impact.
What is your sense there?
If I could jump in there.
Yeah.
If I could jump in, I think the load shedding is the inconvenience factor from a home user, for a residential user. But as I understand, and I may be wrong, load shedding is not a result of increased demand on the networks. Load shedding is a result of poor maintenance of the networks and the infrastructure. So there's a requirement for investment further up the value chain to fix the power generation, the distribution and the transmission networks to be able to deliver a viable EV future from an automotive perspective as well. So the two have synergies that require investment simultaneously to be able to build a brighter future in that respect.
So what you're saying is that it's not about the it's not about the well, no, it is about the demand. It's about the increased demand because of these cars. I mean, let's do some maths based on kind of very high level back of the cigarette packet. I don't even know if that's a saying still. Back of the cigarette packet maths. Never heard it. Oh, you're too young. That's why. No. Back of the cigarette packet maths. I know because of the system I have installed in the house. I know that my house uses about 20 to 25 kilowatts of power per day. Okay. Now I drive on average, lockdown out of the way, I drive about 20% of my car's battery. I deplete 20% of my car's battery per day under a normal office to home, shops, blah, blah, fish-based every single day. Okay. So it's 90 kilowatt hour car. 20% of that is 18 kilowatt hours. Call it 20.
18, yeah.
Okay. So call it 20 kilowatts. So now my house is using 20. Okay. On an average day, I'm using 20 per day. Okay. My power draw is doubled.
When you plug in your vehicle, yeah.
No, but my consumption of electricity is effectively doubled. Yeah. My house is using 20 a day. My car is now using 20 a day. It's doubled.
Yeah.
So I think that's what David's talking about is the power generation and the ability for Eskom to generate the power needs to double. Can we do that?
I think there's a demand. There will be a demand requirement, but there's also an infrastructure maintenance requirement to keep the network up. And that's what, as I understand, is the cause of load shedding. It's not the increased demand on the network that causes load shedding. It's the poor raw material that goes in to generate the power, but also the generator itself has broken down, and therefore it needs to be repaired. And then that's what causes that power plant to go offline for a period of time. And then there's the requirement of the load shedding. So the infrastructure requirement and the investment is across the board, not just into the EV space. We can't just say, let's have an EV future, because there's a requirement to let's have a sustainable energy future and a consistent energy grid, a sustainable energy grid that operates functionally, that can handle the increased demand. So there's in my mind, there's a number of factors that go to it.
But does that impact, do you think that's going to impact people's decision on purchasing an EV? Because I think I'm not sure if it's going to. I don't think people should shy away from buying an EV as a result of the current load shedding situation. I don't think they'll be impacted as much as people believe they would.
Well, I mean, I think if I understand. Sorry, David, if I understand you correctly, and I agree with the way you kind of articulating it, we have enough to generate. So we have enough power generation. We can double the capacity is there. It's the infrastructure breaking down that's the problem.
Correct. So how does that impact the consumer with regards of their thought process to buying an EV? Does the effect, well, we have load shedding on a regular basis in South Africa. Does that mean I'm not going to be able to charge my vehicle, which means the consequence of not being able to charge my vehicle means I can't get to work, or I can't pick my child up from school, or I can't go to the shops? So is there a follow-on effect that limits the industry's ability to influence a consumer to buy an EV?
Good question.
I think that's exactly what it is. That's where the connection that people are making. And I think that's what needs to be addressed, that it's not that big of a deal. Specifically, if you are getting load shedding twice a day or for 2 hours of the day.
So load shedding might save our EV future, is what you're saying, Wandile, and unfortunately, that's where we need to leave it. So that's been fascinating, and and I think there's a lot of questions that don't have answers, and we'll continue having these shows and talking about these topics, and most definitely have David on in the future. So David Ashdown, CEO of Vuka Group, really nice having had you on the show. Any parting thoughts, David?
Only that it's been a great half an hour spent with you two talking about the future of EVs. I do have lots of other thoughts about the industry space as well, but maybe I'll save those for another conversation.
Definitely,
but it's been good. Thank you.
We need a reason to get you back. So, Wandile, any final thoughts before we end off?
Yeah, no, just I can't wait to be having more of these conversations. Like, they're super important, they're super necessary, and the education is, one takeaway is the education is going to be the big factor, and can't wait to bring you more.
Well, on that note, that's been another AutoTrader podcast, and it's been real. My name's George Mienie, and we will see you next time.